Hello, welcome to LM Teaches English. In this video I'm going to be talking you through the poem Extract from the Prelude by William Wordsworth. I'll talk to you about the relevance of the title, anything useful about the poet himself, and then I've got some key quotes here that I'm going to go through with you. And finally I will give you some poems that compare well with the Prelude and a possible question for you to answer as well. So, normally this is the point where I would read the poem, but because it's such a long poem, I'm going to leave that to you today. So, if you'd like to Google it, if you don't have your anthology with you, it should come up, the whole poem, if you type it into Google, and then pause this video once you've read it. And when you're back, what I'm going to do is start with talking to you about the title. So the reason why it's called the Extract from the Prelude is because it is just that. It's an extract from a longer poem. And this was written posthumously. And what that means, if I can fit it in, what that means is that it was published. I say it was written posthumously, that's actually impossible. It was published posthumously. So what that means is he wrote it while he was alive, and then when he died, it was published by his family, presumably, I don't know if we're being cynical, to get some more money, or perhaps because they thought it was so wonderful they wanted to share it with the world. The reason why that's relevant is perhaps it could imply that he didn't want to publish it. Perhaps because, and I think, you know, we can make this into sort of juicy gossip if we want, maybe because it was so personal and he didn't want other people to see it, or, you know, maybe he didn't think it was good enough. Either way, when something is published posthumously, it does raise some questions as to why the poet themselves didn't publish it themselves. William Wordsworth was a romantic poet, and this poem is almost the epitome of what it means to be a romantic poet, in that he was so in love with nature, and he was anti-establishment. So already this should be reminding you of Shelley, who wrote Ozymandias. So already we have a poem in mind that we could compare with this one. Okay, so the poem is about a boy who steals a boat and then takes this boat on a lovely journey through a nice river, which almost glitters, until he comes across a giant mountain which is black and huge, and then he is so frightened that he rows back home in his boat and leaves the boat where he found it, but then he can't sleep at night. He's thinking about what he's done, and dark thoughts. He's having dark thoughts. So one of the reasons why it's good for this poem to come up in an exam is because there are so many possible interpretations of what Wordsworth was trying to do here. And the reason that's good for you is because it gives you plenty to write about, and it shows the examiner that you are considering multiple interpretations, which is where the high marks are, especially for AO2. So, one of the other interpretations is that this is just an extended metaphor for growing up, and in the beginning, when you're young, life is nice and easy. This just does tie in nicely with William Wordsworth's life, whose parents actually died. So he was an orphan at the age of, I think it's about 12 or 13, I can't quite remember. But he became an orphan as a young child, and so perhaps it's a metaphor for that, for him growing up, having a nice childhood, and then this huge peak that appears could be his parents dying or some dark moment in his life. And then after that, he's got this kind of depression. The way he describes it sounds very much like a depression. So it could be a specific event in his life, but then it could apply to anybody growing up. Childhood is easy, growing up is harder, being an adult's much harder. Another interpretation is the Industrial Revolution. Now, he is a romantic, as we said. He's in love with nature, and throughout this beginning of this poem, if you were to go through with a highlighter and just highlight all the beautiful imagery of nature throughout the beginning of the poem, you would find words like glittering And then you come to that huge peak, black and huge, and from there everything changes. It becomes darkness, mighty forms, which could symbolise the Industrial Revolution, as nature is being blocked out by the stars, as these mighty forms that do not live like living men could be the machines in the factories. So, like I said, lots of interpretations for this poem, which make it a perfect choice for an exam or for an essay question, which I'll give to you at the end of this video. So when we talk about individual quotes and language used, I think we have to look at this verb here, unloosed. One interpretation of this poem is that he feels guilty for stealing the boat. Well, here he's being careful not to use the word broke the chains. He's saying unloosed as if to imply he's setting it free. So in his mind, he's not doing anything wrong, he's helping. Chain here almost implies the boat was a prisoner. Do you see how he's careful with his language here to imply that he's doing the boat a favour, he's doing a good thing. The next line, it epitomises, as I said before, how beautiful nature is. We've got the stars, nothing but the stars. There's nothing blocking it out. Nature is beautiful. The stars, think about connotations of stars. You've got wishes, you've got almost romance as well. You've got a clear night sky, no pollution. And then next we come across this huge peak, black and huge. So when we think of black, we think about something bad has happened, so negativity. We think a black mood, perhaps this could be him feeling guilt. We have to talk about the repetition of huge here. Repetition tends to imply frustration or anger or exaggeration. In this case, perhaps it's shock, that it's quite so big what he's seeing. The shock, and that could be relating to industrialisation. Definitely not going to fit that in. So there, this could symbol the industrialisation, or it could symbolise his guilt, or it could also be a peak as well, ties in with that growing up. And these are all adjectives as well. Don't forget to use that terminology to get those marks in the exam. What's beautiful about this quote, and the reason I chose it, is to kind of show structurally as well what the writer was thinking. So we've got here earlier on, the poet specifically mentioned the stars. There's nothing but the stars. And then to show that direct contrast, we now see that this huge peak, whatever that symbolises in this case, is towering up between me and the stars. So now a sort of repeated image for us of the stars, for us to see just how bad things have become. So they're now blocked out. Whatever's happened has either metaphorically or physically blocked out. So this could be, again, factories. It could be guilt for stealing, or it could be growing up. Maybe that clarity is gone. Whatever it was, it's between. It's blocking something. A line here which perfectly sums up how depression feels to us as a modern day reader who understands mental health. Over my thoughts there hung a darkness. It just is exactly almost. It's how you would describe depression, dark thoughts. Obviously, this is a modern interpretation. I mean, there were obviously people were depressed in the 18th century, or the 19th century, actually. But they wouldn't have had this word for it, and it wouldn't have been a medical condition. So we want to know now why his thoughts are dark. Well, again, is it because of his sadness that nature's being blocked out and industrialisation is growing? Is it his guilt for stealing the boat, or is it growing up? And then you've got this evocative verb here, hung. Evocative because it's paired with thoughts and darkness and depression. Finally, the poem, as I said before, is an extract, but this particular extract does not end happily. So we have this ending, huge and mighty forms that do not live like living men. And I think he talks about how they hang over his dreams and his thoughts. So these mighty, huge, again, is repeated from earlier on. It's a nice poem for you to show as well, the kind of repetition throughout, the structural devices that this writer has used, because you've got repetition of stars from earlier on, and you've got repetition of huge to show that the poet's putting these images in your mind and then referring back to them, which is a clever technique for a writer to use. So here we have these huge and mighty forms, which could be, again, one of those three things, one of those three interpretations. Perhaps it's the huge peak that he saw earlier. They do not live like living men. In this case, it almost feels exactly like he's talking about machines from these factories doing the jobs that men used to do. So perhaps it's a comment on how industrialisation is wiping out jobs. It's a political statement. So we could go on and on and on about this poem, but I'm going to keep this short, and I wanted to just give you a few key quotes that you can remember. So I'll stop there with quotes and language analysis, but please do carry on your own. There's lots more to say. What I will leave you with now is some poems that compare nicely with this, and I think just on that ending there, it's clear that this poem would go very nicely with London and with Ozymandias. The first three poems in the anthology go really nicely together when speaking about power. You've also got that inner conflict in this poem, which is really beautifully explored, and it gives you an opportunity to talk about depression and things like that, which perhaps would go really nicely with more of the modern poems like Remains, Poppies, to an extent Wall Photographer as well, because he's having that inner conflict. So this is a poem that goes nicely with both the power and the conflict poems. But the question that I'm going to give you today, and I will write it up in the description box below as well, is compare how the poets of the Prelude and Remains explore inner conflict. Okay, so compare how the poets of the Prelude and Remains explore inner conflict. And if you have any questions, please leave them below and I'll get back to you. Otherwise, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye.